Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Little by Little and we are continuing in our series today on the Homestead house. Now if you've been following along, you already know that the interior of the house is complete. So now it's time to start closing it all in. So in this video today we're going to look at creating the ceiling for the house as well as installing the battery powered lights for the house. So what will you need? Well, it really depends on what type of material you're going to use for your house. As you can see, I've taken all of the removable walls off of the house. It's just going to make it that much easier to do my measuring and my marks for determining where things are going to go. But I want to talk a little bit about the material that I decided to use and why I decided not to use foam board for the ceiling. So I still have not yet 100% decided whether or not I'm going to attach the roof to the house or leave it so that it's removable. And I'll have to make that decision fairly soon, but at this point I haven't yet. And so basically what's going to happen is if I decide to make the ceiling removable, and if it's made out of the styrofoam, chances are that that ceiling is going to get damaged somehow. Every time I lift that roof off of the house, put it back on, lift it off, put it back, if I bump it in any way with the foam board, it's going to dent, maybe scratch, and I just don't think that at this stage of the game I want to have to deal with having to redo the whole ceiling and roof on this project. So I've opted to use a product called Hardy Board. And Hardy Board can actually be purchased in all different widths, but for what I need, I just went with a 1/4 inch because I don't need it to be any wider than that. And I really am cognizant of how much weight I want this house to be when it's finished. Whether you have a Home Depot or a Rona or a Revy or Lowe's or whatever it is you have in your area, they probably carry this type of wood. And typically they sell it in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets. However, our Rona also sells cutoffs or remnant pieces. And so that's where we found this nice 2-foot by 3-foot piece of Hardy Board, which is almost perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about the measurements that we used to cut that Hardy Board down to size. And when I say I mean my husband, because I don't get too close to full-size tools. When my husband cut the board, we cut it so that it is flush on the front and the back to the walls. But on the sides, you can see that there's a little bit of an overhang on either side, and I wanted to tell you why we did that. On this particular house, the roof on this house really only goes one way. There are 3 pieces to it, basically. I'm just going to use my removable walls as a way to explain that. So there is on the house, in the middle section, which I think was the original part of the house, there is a peak that goes like this. And then on the sides, there is another piece that comes like from about 2 or 3 feet up down to the corner. So all of the peaks run the same direction. I don't need to have a roof come down on the front and back, right? The roof is only going to come down on the sides. Now, when you have a roof coming down, you don't stop the roof at where the house stops. You generally will take that roof out a little bit away from the house so that you have an eave or an overhang on the side where your roof comes down. And so that was the purpose of making that side just a little bit longer so that when I do the roof, I have that to come down to. Okay, the other thing that I did after placing it on and getting it situated where I think it needs to be is I just took a pencil. As you can see, I've removed most of the furniture, and I just went in and I drew on the ceiling part with a pencil where the walls are, because that's important, right? Because I'm going to have to measure then to find the center of each room so that I know where to put the light fixture and all that kind of fun stuff. So I did that for each of the rooms. You can also hopefully see, I'm not sure, but if you go back to the video that I did on creating the external permanent walls, you will see that I have cut out these little notches in some of the permanent walls, and there's 5 in total around the house. And basically what's going to happen is there's going to be a wood dowel that's attached to the ceiling piece itself that's going to sit down inside of that notch, and that's going to help to keep the roof from sliding either direction, front or back, because I do have those cutouts on 3 of the exterior walls. The only wall that won't have it is this backside, because of course they're all removable walls, so I can't put those into a removable wall space. But I think with the other 3, it should keep it fairly secure if I decide not to actually permanently attach it. So having said all that, I'm going to take the piece of hardy board off of the house now. We're going to move it over to the workspace, and we're going to do some measuring to find the center for the rooms, and then we'll start with the lights. So hopefully you can see what I was talking about there earlier about marking where the walls are. So once I determined where the walls were, now I'm able to determine where we're going to drill holes for the stove pipe, for the wood stove, as well as the globes for the light fixtures. And so all I did, because I knew the distance of the room, was I just found the center point of each of the rooms. So I've just placed a little pencil circle where those light fixtures are going to be. So of course we have one in the porch, one in the bedroom, kitchen, and then I'm going to put 2 in the living room. So I've drilled out all of the holes now. So these smaller holes will be where the light fixtures will go, and the larger hole here is for the stovepipe for our wood burning stove. I want to talk a little bit about the lights. You can still usually buy these in Michaels. There is usually a section in Michaels that has some lighting that's typical of what I have here, and you might pay $5 or $6. Alternately, you can probably also get them on Amazon. Now with this particular style of light and just how it's wired, I can actually snip off what I don't need, because there's about 20 lights on this string. I only need 5 for the house. So that's what I've done, is I've just gone in and I've cut off as much as I need. And I'll just put this aside because I can probably use that in another project. And I'll just show you that it does in fact still work. Now, one of the challenges that I have is that there is not enough distance in between the battery box and the first light, and then in between the lights themselves, to be able to spread this out far enough to get the lights where I need them. So I'm going to have to go in and cut these wires and add additional wire in between each of these lights so that I can stretch those lights out to fit across the whole ceiling. So that's what we'll look at next, because I do want to take you through the whole lighting process if I can. There is most definitely a positive and a negative wire that goes in between each section. And so if I just went ahead and snipped them all off, I have no way of knowing which is positive or negative except by trial and error, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do before I do any cutting is I'm just going to pick any wire in that section, and it really doesn't matter which, because as long as you're connecting them back to the same type of wire, you'll be fine. So I'm just going to take some masking tape and I'm just going to wrap it around one of the wires. I'm going to do that on 2 spots on that same wire. Now, it honestly does not matter whether this is a positive or a negative wire, as long as this wire goes back together. So now that I've marked one wire, I can go ahead and I can snip through both of those wires and continue to do the same process all the way across. Just a word of caution, before you snip all of your lights apart, because they will eventually all have to be snipped apart, either snip one light off at a time as you're using them, or you can mark each light in the order that you've snipped it off in and make sure that you use them in order. Otherwise, your whatever you want to call it, positive or negative, or green or white. If you're taking the wire from the fourth light and trying to add it to the first light, it may not work. So make sure that you're keeping them in order or well marked. Now that we have everything marked, now we can go ahead and cut all of those pieces apart. I wanted to show you some of the other equipment I'm going to be using for the wiring, but before I show you, I just wanted to say that what I'm doing here with soldering the wires together is I'm only doing that because I have the ability and the tools to do that. If you don't have soldering equipment, you can still do this wiring. You can still twist those wires together. You can put a piece of electrical tape around them to make them secure. And as long as you have a good connection, it's all still going to work for you. So here is what we have. I have, of course, some wire to put in between the spaces. And these are all the same size. It's a very small wire. I got this off Amazon. It does come in a bunch of different colors. Honestly, for what I'm doing here, it doesn't matter what color because I'm not distinguishing between the positive and the negative. But sometimes you do have to do that, and so having an additional color is oftentimes very helpful. So I'm just going to pull one roll out of here, and I'm probably just going to use the white wire. I also have some soldering equipment. So I have this flux, which is like a paste. It's almost gluey inside, except that it's not sticky. Like the consistency of it is very thick. And apparently what it does is it draws the solder down into the wires. So I have some of that. I have some solder, and this just comes on a roll. This is very flexible. And it just basically melts into the wire. And then of course I have a soldering gun, or I don't even know what you call that. It's for soldering anyway. And that just plugs in and heats up, and I'll show you how that works as well. But like I said, if you don't have these, don't rush out and buy them unless you think you really need them, because it's not necessary to complete this process. Once you've got your wires together, oh sorry, I should show you. I have a little pair of wire strippers, and then once the wire is put together, I have these little heat shrink tubes that you put over top of the joint, and then using a heat gun you can shrink that so that it creates a nice bond and seals everything. This would be used in place of electrical tape. So if electrical tape is what you have, then that's what you can use. If you don't have a heat gun, you can also use a lighter or a candle or something like that. You just have to be careful not to hold it over so that it burns, but to just lightly hover it over the fire until it starts to melt. And when I mean it, I mean this stuff. I've also got just a spare piece of wood because I don't want to solder onto my mat and hurt my mat in any way. So I've decided that I'm going to mount my battery box on the outside of the house at the back of the porch. And I'm going to put my first light in the porch, and then I'll just work my way around the house until I get to the bedroom. So the first thing that I needed to figure out is how much wire I needed to get from where the battery box would be mounted to the first light. And that distance was about 15 inches. So I have about 5 inches already if I account for the fact that I'm going to lose part of this when I solder them together. I have about 5 inches, so I've cut then 2 more pieces, because you need one for each wire, at about 11 inches, because I like to give myself a little bit of extra playroom, rather have too much wire than be short. So I've cut 2 pieces of wire, and I have my battery box and my first light. I'm going to flip the board over because our wiring is going to be on the top side. The white side, of course, is the ceiling, and this will be the top side. So I'm just going to use my 1, 2, 3 blocks, and I'll put them up around each side. One on each side, I think. So I've stripped off about 3/4 of an inch off of each of the wires so that I have now exposed wires. But before I twist them together, I'm going to put these little heat shrink wraps onto the wire pieces. So now I have two, one for each side on there. So let's take one piece, and if you open up one side, just split the wires a little bit. And you take the other wire and you put it inside there. Your connection will be a little bit better. So once you've got those together, then just go ahead and twist those wires together. Okay, here we go with the soldering. So first step is to take just a little bit of this flux, and I'm going to use a toothpick. A little bit of that off, and we're going to put that flux onto this piece. Then you can take your soldering iron. You can see now that it's nice and hot, and your solder. And if you place your soldering iron underneath the wire and your solder on top of the wire. I'm going to let that cool just for a minute. And now that that's cool, I'm just going to slide this rubber piece over top of that weld. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to use our heat tool to shrink that. Now we have a nice tight seal that won't pull apart on us accidentally. So we're going to carry on and do that to the second wire using the exact same process. So we'll slide those in so that they're intertwined. Give them a good twist. So let's get our little shrink wraps on there before we forget. Okay, so now we need to determine which wires are going to go onto the light itself so that we make sure we get that straight. So I am going to just turn on my battery, and we're just going to start testing. Hopefully find the right combination fairly quickly. Yep, there it is. So the light is on. So I know that this wire and this wire are going to go together, this wire and this wire are going to go together. Now this is the one that has the black on it, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark a little bit of a black mark on this side so I know that those two go together. I'm going to wrap those two together so that I keep them separate from the others. And I'm just going to feed this now through the hole, because the light has to be in place before you can wire it. Otherwise you won't be able to get it back through that hole. Now if I bring these back, I know that these two are going to go together, and these two are going to go together. So let's start by putting these together. I'm just going to twist them for now, and then I'm going to retest just to make sure I didn't mix them up. Always make sure you turn your battery pack off when you're not testing. You don't want to give yourself a shock, or these wires will start to get a little bit warm if the power is on. Right, so my next light will be this one. So I'm going to go ahead and slide these through the hole. Now, these two wires with the green are going to go together, and these two wires without will go together. But first, I have to create another bridge here. So all we're going to do is repeat that exact same process, adding the bridge wire, connecting the light, and then moving on to the third light. Decided to cut these in half because I really don't need a full piece like that. Before you test, make sure those two extra wires on your light are not touching. So we're just going to carry on like this all the way around to the last hole. And I'm sure you've noticed I haven't been shrink wrapping these. That's because I only have one available plug, and I've got my soldering gun plugged in right now. So once I'm finished all the soldering, I'll go back and do all the shrinking of all the tubing. So the lights are all in now, and I've tested them. I know it's hard to see from this side, but they all work, which is wonderful. I've done the shrink wrapping on all of the ends of all of the wires. And then these last two wires for the last bulb, I've just capped off with another piece of that tubing, just so that there's never any possibility of them touching and short-circuiting everything. So I'm going to flip the board back up onto the other side, and we're going to glue in these light fixtures, and then we'll come back to this side. So I want to glue these bulbs down now so that they don't flop around in there. I'm just going to use some wood glue, and I'll just pull it up and put some glue just around this base. And then I'll drop that down into the hole. I'm going to do that to all 5 of the bulbs. So once the light bulb's dried, I flipped it back over, and I've just covered all of that wire with some tuck tape. And that should hold everything down. We shouldn't have to ever worry about the wires snagging and coming undone. And overall, I think it's going to work really well. That brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Until then, bye-bye for now.